It's the Hag Reads here with a weekly wrap-up for the week of May the 8th through May the 14th. This week I read 9 books. The breakdown on that is 2 children's fiction, 2 young adult, 4 adult fiction, and 1 adult nonfiction book. I am trying to include 1 nonfiction book every week, although right now most of my nonfiction reading is in the form of memoirs. This week's nonfiction book was Walking to Listen by Andrew Forsthoefel, which is the book I won on Goodreads, and that when the book arrived from the publisher, they asked for a review. And so I have a review for this on my blog and on my Goodreads. So the links for that are in the down bar. Overall, I gave it 3 stars. It's kind of part travelogue. The author at the time that he undertook the journey that the book is about was 23, just out of college. So a young, white, educated male walking across the United States. He carried with him a sign that said Walking to Listen, and it's pretty much his finding himself journey, living off the kindness of others. And I won't go too much farther into that. I gave it 3 stars. It didn't wow me in any way, but it was an interesting read and I did enjoy it. But you can find my reviews, my full review of that on either my blog or on Goodreads. Then I went in, the adult fiction I read this week was the Andromeda strain, which I picked up in my library haul this past week or the week before. Much like the movie that I saw from the 70s, this is a slow moving book. It's about, that time in our history when there were a lot of satellites going into orbit and that sort of thing. So the fear of, exposure to viruses or organisms that were not of, terrestrial origin was a big fear. And so this book is about the Andromeda strain, which is, I think, kind of a virus scare. And most of the book is just descriptions of the process they went through. The whole decontamination thing is probably a good third of the book for these 5 male white scientists. To get from the entry point of the lab to the lowest section, the 5th level, where they are actually going to do the experiments and stuff. And then the rest of the book is just descriptions of the experiments and the processes they went through and the meetings they had. There is almost no action in this book. It is purely, I think, a psychological drama that is steeped in the fear of what happens if something non-terrestrial comes into a populated area. In this case, it's just a small town. And but the ending of it was so anticlimactic for me. I won't go into the details of it because I feel that would be spoilery. But I got to the end of it and I was like, there was nothing exciting about that. And it could just be that I don't think there's such a fear of that anymore, or at least I don't have a fear of a satellite falling to Earth and bringing some kind of organism or bacteria or virus with it that would lead to a new type of disease or it just doesn't put any fear into me. We have enough things already on our planet to be afraid of. But I'm glad I read it. And I do think that it's probably the type of book that is the basis for a lot of psychological dramas that are written today. So from that respect, I'm glad to have read it. But if you're thinking of reading it because you think it might be exciting and fast-paced, it's not. The other 3 adult books I read this week were all from the I cannot talk today, from the Agatha Christie series for Hercule Poirot. I read Black Coffee, which was written by a different author, and I did not write down who the author was, but he wrote the book posthumously from a play script that Agatha Christie had written for a play about the Hercule Poirot character. The book was okay, but it was not as good as some of the others that were written. A lot of the descriptions of Peril and other characters and events weren't quite Christie, obviously. I gave it 3 stars, and I give most of the other ones 4 or 5 stars, just because I think they're well written, and sometimes I can figure out the ending, and sometimes I can't. But that one, I didn't enjoy it as much, and before I requested it from the library, I didn't realize that Agatha Christie had not actually written the book, that it was based on a play. So I might not have picked it up. I might have just skipped right over it because it doesn't affect the continuity of the series overall. The other 2 I read were Peril at End House and Lord Edgeware Dies. And I enjoyed both of those. I enjoyed Peril at End House more than I enjoyed Lord Edgeware Dies, although I think that the Lord Edgeware Dies was a more convoluted story. And then my YA books for this week. The YA books I read this week, Frozen Charlotte by Alex Bell. This is a YA mystery. It's a creepy old girls' school that's now a single-family home. There's creepy dolls, creepy children. The story itself is a bit predictable. I think that most adults reading it will guess the ending before you get there. But I gave it 3 stars. It was enjoyable. And I always kind of like creepy children in books, so perhaps that's why I gave it 3 stars. But it's a good light read. It take maybe an afternoon for most people, I think. And then I read the second book in the Murder Complex series, which is the completion of the duology. It's called The Death Code, and that's by Lindsay Cummings. This is straight up a knockoff of the Hunger Games. And it had elements as the first book from the Maze Runner series and the Divergent series. I didn't find really anything unique. I was disappointed in the story itself. The ending was completely predictable to me. And I think it would be largely predictable even to young adult readers, where it was going from the beginning to the end. I didn't find anything unique or terribly interesting about it. I think I gave it 2 stars. And then the final 2 books I read were children's fiction, and that one each, Nancy Drew, which was The Whispering Statue, and book 3 of the Hardy Boys, Secret at the Old Mill. The Nancy Drew, typical and enjoyable. The Hardy Boys mystery, I feel like these mysteries, the boys get into more perilous situations more often. And with both of them, I often wonder, they get captured in almost every mystery in some form, both groups. The Hardy Boys seem to get hit a lot more. Nancy Drew just gets tied up and left places. But I feel like if this weren't an ongoing series, somebody would just shoot both of them. For the level of badness that the bad guys have in these are supposed to be hardcore criminals, and they're constantly just knocking out the sleuths and leaving them places. I don't think real criminals who are trying to get away with things would do that. I understand why for the time period, but also just because it's an ongoing series. Obviously, the main characters always need to be alive, but it's almost ludicrous the amount of times that they get for the Hardy Boys knocked out, tied up, or captured and almost killed. And for Nancy Drew, she often gets left in a closet somewhere, and that's just not realistic. Criminals who didn't want to get caught and go to jail would shoot them and cut their losses and leave, I think. But I still enjoy this series. It's just some of the thoughts that occur to me when I'm reading these sometimes are like, this, they would just shoot them. They would. And that is my final thoughts for this week. I will be back on Wednesday with a work in progress video. Thank you for watching to the end if you have, and have a good time, whatever time of day it is for you. Bye.